Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now this is a special video recorded for Cobra Convergence 4, so please check out the links in the description for more information about Cobra Convergence. And in this video we're going to be restoring a vintage G.I.Joe Dr Mindbender. You can see I have a few Dr Mindbenders in front of me in various states of disrepair. The one on the left is probably the most complete, although he is missing his sort of cattle prod, electrode prod thing, and the tubing that goes to the little power pack. The guy in the middle has the pretty standard problem of a broken pelvis, so we will fix that. He's also got quite a lot of paint damage and sort of scuff, so we will be touching up the paintwork on all of him. And then the one on the right is probably the least of the damaged ones, because basically his O-ring is broken. But those two are also missing the cape, and the cape is something that is a little bit more complicated than just cutting a bit of fabric, because you can see here on the back of it, it has the Cobra logo. So we will be working out a way of recreating this cape and putting the logo on the back of it. But I think the first thing we need to do is actually start work on the one in the middle, because the pelvis takes the longest time to make and repair, so that's the one we'll start with. Here are the two Dr Mindbenders that need the most work. This one really just needs a new O-ring, so that's a fairly simple fix, but this one has the problem of the broken pelvis, which you see a lot on these figures. So I'm going to just quickly take the screw out of the back of that one so we can take him apart, and then we can get to work on fixing up this pelvis. So just split him into his component pieces. Actually, that O-ring is in surprisingly good condition considering it's so old, but we will be replacing that. And here we go, that is the broken pelvis. So that's what it currently looks like, and that's what it should look like. You can see there's quite a chunk missing. So let's get straight on, and we will construct a new front part to this pelvis. To construct the new front part of the pelvis, we're going to use a paperclip to create a sort of support structure that we drill a little hole in there and insert the paperclip in, and then we can build up around that using some milliput and sculpt a new sort of replacement piece. So what we've got to do is drill a small hole that's big enough for this paperclip to just insert into the front of this pelvis, and then we can sort of bend a piece of it to make it look roughly like this sort of shape, and then we can construct on top of that. So I have here a pin vise which has a very small drill bit in, and the drill bit should be the same size as the paperclip. So I've just got to drill quite a small hole into the front here, and you only need to go in a little way because we can super glue this in, but it's got to be enough that it's got something to sort of grip onto, so sort of 5mm if possible. Now sometimes the front of these is not cracked in a sort of nice neat way, but you can still drill into it. Just takes a little while to get sort of a hole started. So I'm just going to carefully drill a hole in this, and we can insert the paperclip. With a small hole drilled, I've now shaped a tiny little piece of the paperclip, and that's going to be the sort of the basis, the sort of understructure for our repaired pelvis. So you can see that's just shaped so it just sort of matches the original sort of curve of a pelvis, and then we can build the milliput up on top of that. But that needs gluing in place, so I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on the end of this and just glue that in place so that it holds firmly, and then we can get started on the milliput. Just drop that in there and position it up so it matches, something like that. We'll just let that set for a few minutes, and then we can get the milliput going. So as I mentioned, we are going to be using milliput to model this pelvis, and it's something that I've shown how to use multiple times on this channel, so please check back on some of my previous videos. It's a two-part epoxy, so you mix two equal parts together and you end up with this, which is a little bit like plasticine, and it means it's very easy to sort of sculpt and work with. I'm going to be using this pelvis as a guide so that I get the shape roughly right, and you can also shape it with a blade and some water. Water works very well for sort of smoothing the surface off. So I've mixed up possibly way too much here, but it's very hard to mix a small amount of milliput. And I'm just going to cut off a little bit and start sculpting onto the peg that we've put in there, the little bit of paper clip, until I get a shape that I'm happy with. It may be that I sort of do this a few times and rework it, because the front of this piece you can see has some sort of lines on it, and the best way to do those is to sculpt it roughly, let it sort of harden for a couple of hours, and then come back and score those lines in, because milliput stays sort of relatively soft for a couple of hours and it gives you enough time to sort of re-sculpt things, and then after 24 hours it goes really rock solid, and then you can paint it. So to start with, I'm just going to sort of get a rough shape, then I'll leave it for a couple of hours, and then we'll come back and sort of sculpt the final bits in before painting. So let's just get sculpting. I think I put a bit too much on there, so I can take a little bit off, and we'll just sort of start making a shape that looks right. So there you go, that's my sort of basis for the pelvis repair. You can see from the side is actually quite important. You've got to make sure there's enough of a hole there for the little hook that holds the legs on to get through, and then you need to get it as thin as you possibly can. I have to say, I don't like to make them quite as thin as the original pelvis piece because that does tend to snap, so I've left it a little bit thicker. You can go as thin as you want to, but I think that's probably about as thin as I will go this time. And now we've just got to leave it for a few hours, and I'm going to do a little bit more sculpting, and then we can come back to this tomorrow and start painting. So that's the first part of this restoration done. It's now about an hour after I've put this milliput on. You can see it's hardened enough that I can actually just start to do a little bit of shaping and put some of the little lines on the front of it. So all I've done is I've taken my knife here and gently marked a few lines so that when this gets painted you'll see the same sort of ridging that the original one had. It's best to do this after sort of an hour to 2 hours, because after that the milliput has gone off enough that you won't be able to do it. But you can see it's still just slightly sort of pliable, and there's enough sort of movement there that we can get those little markings in. Now I'm going to let this dry completely, so we're going to wait until tomorrow, which is a good sort of 24 hours, and the milliput will have gone off fully. In the meantime, I'm going to take the opportunity to do a bit of cleaning on the back of this Dr. Mindbender. You can see there's some black marks. I'm not quite sure what they are. I've tried to wash them off and they don't come off, but I believe a little bit of lighter fluid. You'll see me use lighter fluid a lot as well. But a bit of that on a Q-tip or a cotton bud, and I should be able to remove those lines. Let's just give it a bit of a rub and see what happens. Yeah, you can see that's taking the black marking off. I'm not actually sure what it is. It's something that just won't dissolve in water, but lighter fluid always seems to get rid of these sorts of things. So I'm just going to just clean these up. Any bits that are left on the silver I'm not going to worry too much about because I can touch up the silver paint, but we want to get it off the flesh part of the plastic, and that should look all right. There's also a few marks on the face of this Dr. Mindbender as well, which I think may come off with this. So again, just a bit of lighter fluid and we'll give it a scrub, and hopefully that will clean up as well. It's now a day later and the milliput has had time to dry fully. You can see we've ended up with quite a nice looking result there. If I compare it to the original one, you can see it's going to look really good by the time that's painted up, and that's what we're going to do now. Now I don't really have a sort of purpley paint, so I've actually been out especially to buy some because this is a colour that I'm not really sort of going to use on much other sort of restorations. It's a very unique colour. I found this stuff called model colour, and this is a pretty reasonable shade of purple. I can't actually see a name on there, but it's number 43 of this make called Model Colour. It's not one that I've bought before, but it looks good enough. I've squirted a bit out here, you can see just on the bit of paper I have, and it's a little bit dark, so I was going to mix a tiny amount of white in it, and for the white I'm going to be using what I always use, which is Humble acrylics, and this is number 22. Humble didn't actually have a sort of pinky colour, so just try and mix these two together and see what happens. It may not need that much sort of white adding to it, just to sort of tone it down a bit. Actually that's starting to look alright just with a tiny amount of white added to it. I'm also not going to worry that much because by the time the legs are in place you don't get to see a great deal of this part, and it's also going to have silver on the front of it. This is really just to cover the white milliput to make it look half decent. So let's paint some of this on and we'll see how it goes. You can see that's just a little bit sort of red really, but I think it'll do the job. I'm not going to be too picky on this one. It's certainly be fine once everything is in place. It's just to hide the sort of overall fact that this is a newly cast piece of milliput there. You can see, yeah, by the time the silver's on the front there, I don't think you'll even notice that that has been replaced. So we'll go with that colour and just accept that it's slightly too slightly too red. Now the paint has had time to dry, you can see it actually is matched pretty well. The colour has sort of lightened off quite a lot, and by the time we put some silver paint on the front of that, I don't think you'll notice that that has been repaired at all. So I'm just going to put these two characters back together. I've got some new O-rings. These are 13mm in diameter O-rings, just about 14mm, and they will fit perfectly, so it's just a case of slotting those on. Again, it's something I've shown you multiple times on various figures, so I'm not going to bother covering it sort of fully here. We just need to replace the arms, put the head back in and screw him back together, and then that's that part done. He's starting to look like a pretty complete figure again. With Dr. Mindbender all back together now, we can get on with fixing the paint rubs. As you can see here, he's lost quite a lot of black on his boots, and especially around his belt and on his eyebrows, and always on the hands. So we're going to be replacing that, and I'm going to be using Humbrol acrylics again. This is number 21, which is a nice gloss black, which matches pretty well all of these sort of old toy colours. And with this stuff, make sure to mix it well, because if you don't mix it, it can end up a little bit tacky at the end of it. So you want to mix it nice, sort of and fully, so that it's really well mixed together in the pot before you get it on the brush. And we're just going to go around and touch up all of these little rubs of paint. Then once that's dry, we'll go around and do the silver. So it's a fairly quick job, just because it's easy to cover, but well worth doing. I'll switch to a much smaller brush to touch up the areas on his face, just because they're really quite small, and you just want a tiny amount of paint on there just to be able to touch up the eyebrows. Got a little scratch on his beard there as well. Now for the silver paint touches, I'm going to be using this Uni Paint silver marker. There are different types of these. You can get this Edding version as well, and they both do just as good a job. And you can see here I've already started just sort of colouring in the areas that I want to get sort of silver paint on, and it's very sort of easy to do, and you can easily just sort of go around and make little touch-ups. And again, this paint dries pretty quickly. It takes a few minutes to dry. If you want to let it sort of go off for an hour afterwards, that's probably for the best, just to make sure that all the sort of stickiness has gone. But you can see by the time I put the silver paint on the pelvis there, you can hardly tell the difference between this is the original one and this is the one I've repaired. So the bit of milliput and a bit of sculpting has given a very nice result. So here we have the final figure on the left. You can see that the paint application has worked really well. You can hardly tell that pelvis had ever been broken. It is slightly thicker than the original one here, but really that's only a minor detail. The way it looks and the colours really do match quite nicely. And as I say, I do tend to leave these a little bit thicker just to give them a little bit more support. I don't really want it to break again, and if you sort of make the milliput as thin as this original one, the chances are it may snap off. So just slightly thicker is probably better, just for the sort of strength of it. But as you can see, the end result is we've got two figures that look really nice condition, the one that's been repaired and an original one here on the right.
Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
Another fix I'd like to show is for when you have cracked elbows. Now you'll notice on a lot of these figures, if we zoom in here on the elbow, you can see that there's a slight crack forming just where the rivet goes through, and if you don't sort of be careful with these figures, you'll end up cracking the bottom of the arms off. But there is a way that you can sort of reinforce that and make sure that the crack doesn't get any worse, and it requires some super glue, which I have here, some baking soda and a pin and a little bit of a steady hand, but it is something that can be fixed. So here we have a pin, just a normal everyday pin that you'd use for sewing, and I will show you now exactly what you need to do. We're going to get a bit of the super glue and just squirt it onto a bit of paper here, like so. Then we get the pin and we get a little bit of super glue onto the end of the pin, just a tiny drop of it, and then we can go to the elbow that has the crack on it, which is this one here on this figure, and if we just put a tiny amount of pressure on the elbow, you'll be able to open up that crack a little bit more, and you can then drop the super glue off the pin into the crack, and the capillary action of liquid will pull it into the crack. So we only need a couple of little drops there. Then we take a tiny amount of baking soda and quickly drop that on, and the baking soda makes the super glue go off incredibly quickly and also goes absolutely rock hard. So we just rub that into the area there, and we'll get rid of this baking soda. We're just going to get rid of that, and now that super glue should have gone off really hard, and you can see that the crack is no longer visible. And if we just leave that for a little bit longer, any bits that have been missed by the baking soda will sort of set as well, and you'll no longer be able to get that crack to sort of be pulled open, and that should reinforce that elbow for a good few years longer, and you shouldn't have any trouble with it. With the cape, it's actually a fairly simple process to cut the shape out, because it's like many other capes of this sort of era. It's just a piece of fabric cut with a few holes in it, but it has the added complication of having the Cobra insignia on the back of it. Now there are a couple of versions of this cape. This is the version where the insignia is printed onto the back, and there's another version where it is stuck onto the back, and I think for this sort of purpose we are going to recreate the version where it is stuck on the back. I can see a way to make a printed version, but it involves sending off to get a rubber stamp made, and that actually costs between £20 and £30 to make a rubber stamp, and for doing this cape it's just not worth it. We can do it much cheaper way using some other methods. So the first thing we're going to do is make a pattern of this. I've already scanned this in and I've taken that into Photoshop and I've printed that out, and I have it here. This is my pattern, and you'll be able to download this from toy-polloi.com and use it as you want. And as you can see, I've already cut this out and I've stuck some double-sided tape on the back of it, and that's what we're going to use to stick it onto the fabric so it doesn't move when we're cutting the fabric. So let's get straight on and cut out the fabric part of the cape. The fabric I'm using is called toy knit, and it's a very nice sort of fabric, but very reminiscent of the sort of 80s material that they would have used at the time. It's not quite the same as this material. This is a sort of a little bit of a sort of cheapish velvety type sort of velour type fabric, and I couldn't find anything exactly like that, but I think the one with the sticker on it is actually made out of this toy knit type material, so this should look perfect once it's in place. But really you can use whatever fabric you want to. Previously I have used t-shirt material because that also gives quite a nice finish, but this toy knit is what we are going to be using today. So I have my pattern here. I'm going to take the double-sided tape off the back of it, and then you want to sort of soften the stickiness of the tape, because if you don't it sticks incredibly well. So I'm just going to stick this onto my jeans a few times and it will pick up a bit of fluff off those and reduce the amount of stickiness, and then we can stick it on here and cut out the cape. So there you can see it's got a bit of fluff from my jeans. Now this toy knit fabric has a definite sort of line to it, and I think it would be nice to have the lines going across it. So that's how I've laid this fabric down. I'm going to just stick this onto the material, and then we can cut that out and get the first part of this process ready. So I'll just cut that out roughly because it's easier to cut when it's not attached to the main piece of fabric. We just quickly cut around that. For cutting the armholes out, I find a good way to do that is just to get a single hole punch, and you can use that to punch through. Sometimes the fabric is a little bit tough and it won't cut completely, and you will need to sort of use a pair of scissors to just get the last bits off. But on the whole, a hole punch is a great way of doing it. You just got to sort of roughly line it up through the side and punch away. You can see there it's actually punched a reasonable hole, and it saves you having to cut it by hand. There you go, both armholes done. Now what we've got to do is remove this double-sided taped on pattern. and we will be left with the cape. You can see there the hole punch has left just a few little bits there, so that's why we need the scissors just to tidy that up, but that really makes no effort whatsoever. Okay, that is the basis for Dr. Mindbender's cape. Now we can move on to putting the emblem on the back of it. Now, to get the emblem onto the back of this cape, we're going to be using some iron-on printer paper. It's the sort of stuff that you'd use to iron on images onto a t-shirt. And I've designed another file, which you can get from toy-polloi.com, which contains two versions of the logo, one in a sort of lightish grey and one in white. The original emblem is a sort of silvery grey, so that's why we've got the grey version, but I actually quite like it in white as well, so I thought I'd put both versions there. And now we're going to iron this onto a piece of white cotton material, and I have that here. This is something I've used before, as you can see. I think this is just a piece of an old pillowcase, and we're going to follow the instructions that come with the iron-on transfer paper and then iron that onto this using a semi-hot iron, and then we can go about getting it onto the back of the cape. But first off, let's iron those emblems onto this piece of cotton. As you can see, the iron-on transfer paper works really well. We've now got quite a nice crisp version of the Cobra logo there. And on the back of that, I've just stuck 2 bits of double-sided tape, because that is how we're going to attach it to the cape. But first we need to cut it out. Now, I put this on a circle because originally I was intending just to cut out a circle, but it actually seems to work better if you cut out quite sort of neatly around the edge of the Cobra logo. So that's what I'm going to do this time. I've just got a pair of scissors here. We'll just cut out quite close. We'll leave a little bit of a sort of a black outline, because you don't want to go too close and sort of start cutting bits of the logo away. But, you know, a little sort of 1mm line around the edge will look perfectly good once it's all done. So let's just get this cut out and we'll stick it onto the cape and see how it looks. And there we have it all cut out. I've removed the double-sided tape on the back of it, so we can just stick this to the cape. I found double-sided tape works particularly well for this. You can use fabric glue if you want, but double-sided tape just seems to do the job and is nice and easy to work with. So I'm just going to line this up. I've got an original here just to sort of roughly work out where it's going to go, and it looks like the 2 eyes need to go sort of bang between the armholes there. So we'll just stick that on like so. And you can see that gives quite a pleasing result. That does look quite a lot like the original. Maybe could have been a little bit darker, but I quite like this sort of the greyness of that. Let's get this on a figure and we'll compare them all lined up. And here are 4 versions of Dr. Mindbender with his cape on. Now you can see the ones on either end are originals, and the ones in the middle are the ones that I've just made. Now this is the grey version. I quite like that one. That sort of matches the closest. I did a version in white here as well, and I've actually put that a little bit lower down on the cape, so I thought it might look quite nice. The positioning is really up to you. If you want it to look original, then it obviously has to be a bit higher, but a little bit lower you get to see more of the logo. It's not sort of distorted by his arms, but positioning is really up to you. But you can see as an overall effect, the emblem works really well, and also the fabric that I've used, this toy knit material, seems to hang and look quite like the original one, so I'm really pleased with the end result on this.
Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
The last thing we need to sort out for Dr. Mindbender is his weapons. I've managed to source a few of them here, so we're going to put these with the figures. He comes with a little pistol, which looks like that, and then the other part is an electric prod, which has a little generator. Now, quite often when you get G.I. Joe figures, the bits of tubing that sort of go between various parts of the weapons is missing. Now you can see here, this is a piece of the tubing that should be with this. I have a feeling this may be a little bit too short, because this is a particularly short piece of it, and if I attach it between the generator and the electric prod, you can see it's not really much use, because this will end up sort of dangling behind Dr. Mindbender. But what we need is to find a replacement for this tube. Now there are a few websites that sell replacement G.I. Joe tubing, but really all they've done is they've bought something, cut it up into small pieces, and are selling it at quite a markup, which is not something I really sort of approve of. So what I've done today is I've actually searched around and found a good replacement, so you can buy your own stuff and make your own tubing. And what it is, it's called jewellery tubing. Now I have a whole load of it here. It's incredibly cheap. I bought 5 meters of this, and I think it cost me £2.50, and it is the perfect match. It may not be quite as shiny, but I think you can actually buy shiny versions of this. This is a sort of a nice matte black finish. You can get it in all sorts of colour. Just look on eBay for jewellery tubing and it will come up. Now this is a 2mm diameter tubing with a 1mm inner sort of diameter, and you can see here that it fits perfectly over the little pegs on the back of his electric prod. So we're just going to use some of that. So I've already cut a couple of pieces. Now I've cut a few different lengths here because I thought it might be quite nice to have the electric generator sort of actually sitting on the floor. So I've got a really long piece here and then a sort of middling length piece here. But you can see if we plug this in to the prod on this one, onto the generator, it does the job perfectly well, and it's going to look really quite nice. Now I have a different version of the electric prod here. This is from one of the weapons packs, which is in a sort of a brown plastic. I couldn't find silver versions of all of them. I'm still sort of hunting parts, and I've actually only found one pistol at the moment, but it's enough to get one figure looking nice. So this one has the extra long bit of tubing on, and that should work really well because it means that you can actually sort of put that on the floor and it will look quite nice. So let's get these weapons on the figures and see what they look like. And here we go. Here is the finished Dr. Mindbender with all the bits repaired and replaced that you've seen throughout this video. And I have to say, he's looking pretty nice. I'm really very pleased with how he's come out. It's a lot of work to get some of these figures sort of up and running again, but it's always worthwhile. I think the most complicated thing on here was to do the cape, because it's not something I'd done before, putting an emblem on the back of the cape, but it ends up looking really nice. And the pattern and guides for that are available for free from toy-polloi.com. So if you want to restore your own Dr. Mindbender, then please go there to get all the files that you need. And I need to say a thank you to a few people who've helped to supply parts for this project. And first up, I need to say thanks to Tony from Analog Toys, who actually sent me the first Dr. Mindbender that I had in my collection, which is this guy on the left. Then I also need to say a thank you to Cy from Retro Revival, who sent me the Dr. Mindbender that was in pieces with the broken pelvis, which is the one we've done most of the work on today. And then a few other thank yous to Dale Welton, Robbie Burns, and also to eterniacollectibles.co.uk, who I managed to buy a couple of the missing pieces for these figures from. So thanks to all of those people for helping out in this sort of major restoration project. And I need to say a massive thank you to Hooded Cobra Commander 788 for inviting me to take part in Cobra Convergence. If you haven't checked out some of the other videos and projects that are involved in this, then follow the link in the description to see what's been going on all of this month. And I hope this video has been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
The one in the middle has the standard pelvis break that you see on pretty much all of these vintage figures. They generally seem to break at this weak point here at the front. And then on the one on the... start that again.